Welcome back to another episode of the Max Stern Podcast. Kyle Stitch here alongside James Finch, and today we are kind of going through Dom from the Athletics NHL front office rankings. I know that these have been out for a little while at this point, but we're kind of at our middle of summer lull as far as content goes, waiting for just waiting for RFAs to be wrapped up before we fully record our kind of contract projection wrap up. We'll probably do that as a little bit more into September at this point. And I don't know, we were just looking for kind of something fun and different to talk about. And I think we've kind of talked about front offices to an extent at times, but it gives us a good opportunity to kind of go through, give our thoughts relative to what seems like the public, what another smart person's kind of also adding their thoughts to as well. Really, his is more of a public. It's really more public voting based, I believe.
The ranking is entirely based off of the collective opinion of well-informed subscribers, were Dom's words. I doubt there's any sarcasm to that. But, yeah, public rankings, and he added his own analysis to each team.
So that's what we're going to go through. Hopefully you subscribe to The Athletic so you can actually read these. If not, we're going to be kind of going through the rankings that he has, going through and talking, I guess, how we view each front office. We'll probably talk about some we think are higher than they should be, some that are lower than they should be. Realistically, a lot of them have their strengths, a lot of them have their weaknesses. It's hard to differentiate when we start getting 13, 14, 15, for example. Those are all the same. There's some clear top ones, there's some clear middle ones, there's some clear ones that probably need to be doing a better job. So he asks, if you're not familiar, for the public to basically give a rank of 1 through 5 in the following categories: roster building, cap management, drafting and developing, trading. Draft develop is one category, to be clear. Trading, free agency, and vision. Kind of the vision being the long-term plan or short-term plan. And then just an overall, how confident relative to last year are you in these front offices? And then he totals up, basically averages out all those different categories to come to a kind of total score, and that's how the rankings are compiled. So the first team on the list, Stanley Cup champion Florida Panthers. I mean, they're certainly proved to be one of the stronger front offices. I think you asked me who to rank one. Maybe I go them. There's certainly some level of recency bias with them just winning the cup, which is justifiable.
Yeah.
I think the thing that the Panthers have done really well is establishing a salary structure and sticking to it, getting Sam Reinhart signed to that contract that they did. Gustav Forsling, same thing. So that's helped tremendously, whether them being located in tax-free Florida helps, and building up other intangible things around the organization and stuff like that has helped them. I think it has.
Yeah.
They've drafted pretty well, like Anton Lundell, for example.
Yeah. So I mean, I would say, because a reason I guess they're first is, for the public, they pretty much graded out very well across the board, but the one category that was a bit lower, that was not an A or an A+, was draft and develop, which I think, if I was going to critique Florida, that might be where, because a lot of their key pieces are not homegrown. So you look at Tkachuk and Reinhart and Verhaeghe and Forsling, and I could keep Sam Bennett, Bobrovsky. A lot of their key pieces were from other teams. It popped into my head the Tkachuk trade. Well, you had Huberdeau and Weegar that were traded for them. Okay. So I don't know if I would agree with necessarily criticizing them for drafting and developing. I would say maybe they are kind of average as expected. It's not necessarily their stronger component for the organization, if you will. But I would be willing to say if there was one spot I would pick them apart for, I'd probably go after the drafting and developing.
I question their roster development as it roster building a little bit as it relates to building out their bottom six. I think they have a lot of really good top end talent. And as the point you made about, like, I was going to bring up, if you didn't, who did they give up to get some of those assets? As you said, Uyghur, Huberdeau, Devin Levi was one of the key components to get Reinhart,
which is a top prospect, but
yep.
For now that's a prospect.
Yep. So I critique Ford a touch with their like they're still a really strong team. I think their bottom six at times wasn't as good as it could have been, and maybe if I was to say nitpick a little, I'd maybe knock them a little bit for their roster building, in that their bottom six, the type of players they've added there have not been the best at times.
Luszczyszyn, Rodriguez, Lundell.
Maybe bottom line.
Fourth line.
Which is very nitpicking.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but it's fair. Like, if you're going to do this for each team, that's fair, I would say.
But they won the cup, so I can't.
Yeah,
you can't question
the other
too
thing
much.
Is, like, we're kind of saying, if we are going to critique them, it's a little bit in these smaller areas, but it's not even like they were bad. They just weren't elite.
So them being high in the rankings, absolutely warranted, especially because they won the cup. But I think just the sustained success in being able to draw players at a lower price, the no state income tax might help a little bit.
Yep.
I think does boost maybe the front office a little bit, make them look a little bit better than they maybe deserve credit for, but they still deserve very high marks. I don't want to sound like I'm knocking them, I think, but they could be bolstered by some other factors that are a little bit in their control, but also a little outside of their control. Second in the rankings are the Dallas Stars, who I think up until July 1st wouldn't have a massive problem with. There's always been a couple lingering questions. I don't think they've had a great offseason. I think you would agree.
Yeah.
Still probably one of the better front offices. They score, of course, very well in drafting and developing, which is completely warranted.
Yes, 100%.
Roster building and cap management, I think they received, from the public at least, a little bit better of grades than they... Cap management, actually, I'd say they've done fine, relatively fine with.
Yeah.
If you want to knock them for their roster building, like, the cap space they've allocated to the type of play, like the roles that they see the players playing, I think has been fine. It's the players they've chosen, which has not been as great at times.
Mainly this offseason thing, which is interesting. This is a team where the fan base... versus the general public, the fan base was a little bit lower on their own team. My big thing would be free agency, specifically this year. It kind of felt like once they knew they were going to need to replace a certain player like Chris Tanev, it almost felt like they kind of hit the panic button a little bit with some signings. Dumba and Lyubushkin. Both players I was a little surprised to see Dallas target, thinking of Dallas as usually a fairly smart team. I don't expect those additions to go too well for them. So I think having them number 2 on the list, that's a little high for me. I guess you could call it recency bias, because in general I like a lot of what they do, but being number 2 with what happened this offseason is a little too high for me.
Yeah, we'll get some of the other teams that maybe you can make a case for over 2. I don't know how many I can make a case for being better than Dallas, but I think that they do take a little bit of a knock a little tumble in my eyes, I guess, based on those two signings. The other, I guess, roster building kind of issue that I've had with them for a couple years now is a backup goalie. They've relied a lot on Jake Ottinger, and he's been great in the regular season, but at times. But it feels like the workload at times has also caught up to him. So maybe spending a little bit more and looking for a little bit more of a viable backup option could be the difference for them.
I haven't had an issue. So it's pretty much been Wedgwood with Ottinger, and I don't have any issue with Wedgwood as a traditional backup, but as soon as you need him to play more games than a traditional backup, you're in trouble. Which is, if that's what they need or needed, yeah, they probably should have allocated a little more there. But
I personally feel like they have needed someone that's a little bit more than a backup, maybe a little closer to a 1B than a backup. I would like to see Ottinger more at the 40 to 50 game opposed to exceeding the 50.
Yeah.
But it's nitpicking a little bit, but a couple years ago that could have been the difference between them going out early in the playoffs and making a deeper run. So
true.
Anyways, Dallas, I think they take a little tumble in my eyes. I think you got to make a case for someone. We'll see who you want to make a case for coming up above them. Next in the rankings, Tampa Bay Lightning. I don't know.
I can't. So fan base is way higher than the public. The fan base is probably still real happy with the cup wins of kind of the Lightning dynasty, if you will.
And seeing Jake Gensel come in.
True. There's good things about that addition. There's bad things about that addition. I won't even go into it too much because we've talked a lot about that in past episodes. Go ahead and go listen to our free agency episodes, recap, everything. My biggest issue with the Lightning is I don't even know if I have one biggest issue. They're kind of the team that went all out when they had their dynasty. They don't have much as far as upcoming good prospects. They're consistently thin on tradable assets. And they're kind of just getting to the point now where I'm a little worried if they're going to start just treading water, trying to stay good, when it might be better to kind of dive into the lull a little bit and regroup. Stamkos is gone, which could have been diving into the lull a little bit, not signing a big contract for a player, but then pretty much handing the money to Gensel, who's younger, better right now probably, but you're kind of setting yourself up again for that long term. In a few years, the contract could start looking not as great. I don't know. It feels like a team really trying to hang on, and they should maybe not do that.
Yeah. I think they're better than when the Detroit Red Wings were trying to keep their playoff streak alive. I think the Lightning I don't think they're cup contenders anymore, but I think they have slightly deeper playoff aspirations than the Red Wings did those last couple years of their kind of playoff win streak. I think so. They let Stamkos go and bring Gensel, but they also bring back McDonough, sending out Sergachev in the I'm not saying these aren't bad moves, but there's also still a lot of, and they bring back a lot of the same guys. There seems to be an attachment to keeping the players that have gotten them there. Ironically, Stamkos being kind of the one out.
Yeah.
Eventually, that's probably going to catch up with them. Yeah.
They've still got some real good players. I don't think they're a bad team. I think they're kind of on the downturn of their championship window, and I think they're really trying to stop from falling down, and I don't know if they really can stop it. And they're trying to, so some of the decisions are a little bit like, okay, I guess that's fine, but are you actually keeping yourself in that top tier of teams? I don't think so.
I would knock the Lightning front office a little. I think there have been moves that they could have made, should have made, or made that they shouldn't have made that have kind of snowballed a little bit. It's become a little too frequent. Like the Tanner Jeannot trade a couple years ago.
Yeah.
I think some of the contracts they gave out, like Sergachev's not a bad player, but they gave him a lot of money. And then I don't think it was all Brisebois that gave all these bridge deals and then longer term out, but they backed themselves into kind of corners with Kucherov Point. I think things are just catching up, as you said, over time. They're still one of the better front offices because they've done a lot of good to keep their roster where they are, but 3's a little high for me. I think there's better teams. 4, I'm a little surprised this team came in this high. They had a decent offseason, but I don't know if this good. Utah Hockey Club. I think they're getting credit because they have an owner that's willing to spend now.
Well, I was going to say just the ownership change probably pumped them up a little bit.
It's still the same front office that was in. I know that there's probably less financial restrictions, but it's still the same front office that was in Arizona for a few years. That they didn't do poorly, but I find them maybe a little bit above average. I certainly don't find them 4th best in the NHL.
I agree. I think when you factor everything in, I agree. Just in general, I don't love lists like this because certain teams, I think it starts to get a little apples to oranges a little bit, where I think it becomes really tough for people to grade out and decide the difference between a Florida Panthers team and a Utah Hockey Club. Because they're both in very different stages of just an organization's existence, pretty much, of one being a top Stanley Cup contender and the other is just looking to get into the playoffs. So both could be doing their jobs very, very well, but the outcomes aren't nearly as great, I guess. So I don't know. I mean, I think they've done a decent job as far as kind of what is expected of them, especially in the past couple of years. I think they've made good moves. I don't think they're 4th, but I don't think they should be like way far down the list either.
I mean, their big moves were trades for Marino and Sergachev,
which is improvement.
It's improvement. Is it enough improvement? Was the price for those players that they paid fair? Do they have more needs? Absolutely, they have more needs. Like they're closer to the playoffs. Are they a full playoff team? I don't know. And I don't know what as you laid out, like what should we be grading them on? Should they be striving for the playoffs? I don't know if that's quite.
I would say they should be expecting to contend for a wild card, maybe. Like I think that would be fair. But it would also be fair for a team like this. Would it have been smart for them to go into free agency and just go crazy and sign 4 new players to long-term deals who are all 32 years old? No. But maybe if they were a team like Tampa Bay signing Gensel, in a way, you could almost, if their decision is to, we are going to keep trying and win a cup, well, no one's coming up the system for them. So, okay, I guess go sign Gensel. But for Utah, just the stage that they're in, they are still waiting on some younger players to get to the NHL and take a big role with the team. So, yeah, I don't know. I would say maybe a wild card team.
I think we both agree 4 is a little bit too high.
Yeah.
We'll probably make a couple cases. We still haven't found someone that I put above Dallas either at 2. So 5th on the list, Vancouver. they had a fine off season. They brought back a lot of. I think they did fairly well in free agency. I think again it's a question of were those the right moves. I think that's where some questions. But I mean, we've seen a couple times point out on Twitter, X. I guess I should be saying at this point that their contracts were like almost most in line with ours of like any team. Our projections those are. So we can't knock them for the value of those, but were they the right players for the right team? I think those are some fair questions.
I'll be honest. I don't mind what Vancouver has done this offseason. They didn't get a top fish, whether it was free agency, which I don't think there was really like a top one other than Gensel, but that didn't really seem like it was happening. And I guess Reinhart, but he was taken off, extending or re-signing in Florida. So bringing in a winger like DeBrusk, they needed at least one winger probably in the top six. That's fine. Like you said, all the players they brought back, they pretty much did on good contracts. Sometimes looking at free agency, a more simple offseason is actually a good thing, and just kind of keeping your own guys, bringing in an extra winger. I wouldn't knock them really for this offseason. I think in general, Vancouver, I think there's some reason to believe that they might regress a little bit, which is what it is. And I would almost say it might be a good thing that they didn't overreact to how great of a season that they had. In general, it seems like they're building a quality team. Maybe they're a little high. I think there's some teams that I guess could be a little above, but I don't think I have an issue with them being, I would say, top 10. Top 5 might be a little high.
I think I put them above Utah.
Yeah.
I think they don't get quite the benefit that Tampa does because that front office has won cups.
Yeah.
But I think I also have them behind Dallas. So
yeah,
and Florida, of course.
Yeah.
But
I'm not. Yeah, I wouldn't be moving them actually up. I would put them in front of Utah, but not higher than they are on the list. Probably down a few notches.
So 6, Montreal Canadiens. I like their cap management strategy with long-term deals for their young prospects. Yeah. I can never knock that. I don't think they've really... they're being patient with their build, which I'm not going to knock, but I also think they've held on to some aging players too long, and I still don't know if I see the full plan vision for that front office.
Yeah, I was going to say vision is a little... That's where I have an issue with the Canadiens. I think they've kind of struggled to decide exactly what plan they want to do. They haven't been a very good team, but roster-wise, it kind of seems like they're trying to be close to a playoff team. Some veterans that you would think they'd ship off and get something for to build for a future with a lot of the younger guys who, again, they're making smart decisions with contracts. And they just haven't really shipped off many of those veterans. So it's just kind of, I don't know, I guess they haven't done anything too like bad in a while, but I don't really get what they're trying to do at times. So yeah, 6 is too high for me. They're definitely more like 15th down in that middle range.
I was going to say 10 to 15 is probably where I would. We'll get to some more teams and we'll see, but yeah, I don't think I disagree with basically anything there. So 7, another team I personally think's a little bit high, maybe they're about right, but I think I'd put some of the teams behind them above them, and that's the New Jersey Devils. They've been a roller coaster for me. I liked them a lot in the beginning. I think they had a pretty good offseason this year, but I think they wasted away last season. And I know there were injuries, but going into the year with the goalie situation that they did was a fireable offense, and then not doing anything about it until the trade deadline when they were too far out of it. It was a fireable offense for the coach who didn't build the team.
Yep.
I like their young players. I like how they've locked up some of those young players to long-term contracts, but it's time for them to take a step forward.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'll say Dougie Hamilton being hurt for a lot of the season didn't help last year.
No.
I do agree. They were seeming like they were going to be one of the top teams in the NHL and ended up taking a step in the wrong direction. Very much so, actually, in the wrong direction. I think just a lot went wrong. I like the team overall that they've built. I don't mind some of the moves that they've made. Some other ones I am a little iffy with. Brett Pesce. I guess bringing in Pesce, moving out Marino. I know there's some Devils fans and that actually are okay with that. I think in general, I don't love that short term or long term. One of the interesting things about the Devils and the way the fans and public voted about the Devils was draft and develop. The public said A, which I think might be maybe I don't know if that's a touch high. It might be a touch high for me. The fan base said C+. I think that's a little too low. Jack Hughes, Nico Hischier, Jesper Bratt. There's just a few players in the top 6. You could even say a Dawson Mercer, who had a down year but should still be a key piece. Luke Hughes, Simon Nemec. There are some really good young players on this team. I understand some fans might be upset, so like Holtz didn't end up working out. You had some young goalies who, to be fair to them, were probably put in a spot that they shouldn't have been yet, but ultimately you had some young goalies playing who did not play well. So there might be a little negative bias towards that a little bit. So public versus fan base, it was A and C+. I might like say B+ myself. But that was just kind of interesting to see the fan base that low when a good chunk of your core was homegrown. Your captain, your 2 top 6 centers, top 6 winger, 2 of your young defensemen who should be a big part of your future. It's I don't know. I think fan base might have been a little harsh on the Devils in that regard.
For me, the Devils come down to, am I more or less optimistic about the front office basically at this time this year, right now, compared to a year ago, compared to the year before? And I probably am a little more optimistic about them this year compared to last year. But to me, they've fallen dramatically in my mind over the last 2 years, really. Again, the goalie situation last year was very obvious that it was not good enough.
Yeah.
And I know Hamilton was hurt, and that's not an easy replacement, but the goalie situation, the defense, maybe the build of that outside of, like, when Hamilton got hurt, there wasn't a ton of plan B options there.
Yeah.
Which
not a lot of teams have a plan B for a guy like
number
that.
one, yes. But I don't know. It was a lot of hope that Luke Hughes and Simon Nemec were really good. And they were good, but not probably not quite ready to be in that role. So And then the Holt situation, I mean, it is a player, like, it happens, but holding on to him for that long when, I mean, maybe they could have done something longer, or I don't know.
Well, you talk about the obvious goalie need, and if you're a little worried about a player like that, maybe you could move him prior to the season before he has a poor season.
Yep.
And if you're willing to trade him for a bottom 6 guy this offseason like you did, I have to think that before this past season there was already a little bit of negative sentiment from the front office, or at least in how they viewed Holtz. So, yeah, I agree.
And, I mean, I go back even to the Timo Meier trade. He was not included. What did the Devils not want him, or did the Sharks not want him? We don't know. But if the Devils didn't want to include him, then they gave up other prospects and now dumped him for basically for very little. Like, that's not great either. So, Devils, I think, are about okay. I'm a little more soured on them over the past couple of years, but I think overall they're probably about where they belong in the rankings. Maybe I put them ahead of Utah, but I think that's maybe about it of all the teams ahead of them. Next, Carolina Hurricanes. I think that 8's too low. I'm not going to say they had a perfect offseason, but they were in a tough spot, and I think they navigated it pretty darn well. Outside of maybe Gensel.
So Gensel is what it is. I think at a situation like that, kind of what are you going to do? If a player's going to leave, you get an asset for him, great. A lot of times that doesn't happen. They just end up leaving. That is what it is. The Natchez saga, if you will, don't love that. Don't love the contract they ended up coming to. Just the overall situation very much feels like you still have a player that doesn't want to be there. Just a lot of negative noise around that. And the way the offseason ended up shaping up, you still have Seth Jarvis, who maybe you can get a long-term deal done, but you're getting kind of close to the point where that might not be the case. You might need to go short-term instead, which I think that's a mistake. Bringing back someone like a Jordan Martinook, that's fine. That's good. Defense looks quite a bit different with Pesce and Shea gone. So 1/3 of the defense gone. Shea was probably top 2. So I don't know. In general, they're usually a very smart front office. They have kind of a good play style as far as being really strong defensively. That's part of roster building. Drafting and developing. But I will say drafting and developing, there might be a little bit too much praise, I think, with Carolina there. They have some quality guys that they've drafted and developed, but I feel like they've done good there, not great, especially in kind of recent years, past few years. A lot of praise without a ton to show for it.
And a lot of promise without a lot of proving it from some of the young kind of current prospects.
Yeah.
I mean, Jarvis being kind of an exception, but you get beyond him, they haven't necessarily promoted.
Yeah.
Kochikov, I guess, would also fall in draft and develop, but like him and Jarvis are similar age, similar drafts.
Yeah. And it speaks to like they've done well, but I don't think they've been great. So I think in general they're a pretty good team. I might move them up a spot or two, but I don't think 8 is ridiculous necessarily.
I like them over Montreal. I like them over Utah. And I think I put them ahead of the Devils. That's
maybe so.
they're
To me,
they're very similar.
There's honestly, like, yeah, I could flip flop those two back and forth, and I'd probably not ever be able to decide at this point.
Team, front office, I think, has been very disrespected because of things based outside of their control. Colorado Avalanche come in 9th on this list. I think that's ridiculous. Right now, the issues that Colorado has is because we've talked about this in other episodes. Gabe Landeskog and Valeri Nichushkin are potentially not going to be available through no fault of the front office.
Yeah.
And they can't spend, especially Nichushkin's cap money, because he very likely could be back mid-season.
Yeah. Landeskog, they probably at least have some type of idea of whether or not he could be available. But, yeah, Nichushkin, they're going to find out, I think, November, December.
Somewhere right in there.
Somewhere right in there. And there's no knowing right now what happens, so they can't use that money. So, yeah, kind of backed into a corner, not in their control. What I think dragged them down a little bit here was their fan base for draft and develop gave them a D+. So, like, their fan base actively said your drafting and developing is bad.
I don't think that's a fair knock, because a team in their situation shouldn't be drafting and developing. They should be trading.
Yeah, and they
Grade out
really
well there.
look at their core.
Yeah.
Drafted and developed.
Yes.
So, I don't know. Am I giving them an A+? No. Am I giving them a D+? Absolutely not. They should probably be in the B+.
Yeah. McKinnon, McCarr, Landeskog. I know Landeskog injury. Rantanen.
The reason I say probably B+ is I would kind of, I guess, agree with fans if they wanted to say depth-wise. So bottom 6 and then bottom pair. Maybe not the greatest, but their core is homegrown. D+ is very, very critical, I think, not correct.
And again, they really shouldn't have been using a lot of these premium assets to draft and develop. They should have been trading them away as they did.
Yep.
And ironically, the fans gave them an A in trading.
And the other one would be Bo Byram, who they turned into their second-line center in Casey Middlestat. So, like, there's drafting and developing in order to improve your team.
Yeah. And I'd say another feather in their cap, like Logan O'Connor came from nowhere I know he had an unfortunate knee injury to end his season, but he was great for a while. And like he's a draft and develop guy. Like I
look at this ranking and they're 9th. And they've got a lot of good responses except draft and development that dragged them down, and I think that's incorrect. So that they should be higher on the list.
Did you put them ahead of Dallas? Right there?
No.
Slightly
probably
behind.
Like right behind them. I would put them above Tampa.
I would too.
So Colorado would be 3 right now.
I would agree. Agree. Yeah. 10, Barry Trotz and the Nashville Predators. I personally feel this is probably about right. He's made a lot of aggressive moves, which I think the fans appreciate. I think he's made some decent, like some of those have been smart moves too. Brady Shea, I think, was a good idea for them.
Of all free agent long-term signings, that's probably a better one to make.
So I think the places I'd knock them, maybe a little too much money in free agency, maybe. Or maybe a little too much term, maybe not so much dollars, but term.
Stamkos, Marchessault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The Saros decision, I'm not saying is a bad decision, but still having Askarov on in your organization and giving Saros that extension, maybe is a little, I'm not saying bad, maybe a little questionable.
Yeah, I think I'd be interested to see if somehow he's still moved. It's easier to do a prospect like that, but it seems like with Askarov wanting to be in the NHL at this point and then an extension for Saros, that decision might have been made, even though he hasn't been traded yet. It very much seems like that's going to happen at some point.
The other place that I think Nashville falls a little short, and I don't know if this is so much Trotz's doing as it was Poile, was drafting, building a prospect pool.
Yeah.
That's kind of still not great.
They have some solid guys, but the high-end talent is missing. I think Trotz probably hasn't been there quite long enough, and they've been a good enough team. They haven't really had the higher draft picks. Yeah, I would agree there. And they didn't grade out too well there. B- for the public, C+ for the fan base. Yeah, I mean, it probably isn't 100% fair to critique Trotz for that, but if you're looking at Nashville Predators, yeah, it hasn't been where it should be.
I think I put them ahead of Montreal and maybe Utah, but otherwise that's about it.
Yeah.
So maybe they're a touch higher, but
I agree.
this feels about right. Another team.
In Barrie, we Trotz.
We'll let that linger for 1 second, unless I edit that out, or
Hey,
at least
maybe.
the pause out.
But
I won't edit the joke out. Don't worry.
well, no, you did say though. He's made some bigger moves, which, from a vision standpoint, they graded out average. I'm almost a little surprised. I feel like the fan base would have been a bit excited about the moves like Stamkos, Marchessault, Shea. So I don't know. I guess they still got a fine grade. They ultimately ranked 9th still in vision, but I would have expected the fan base to be a little biased there.
I think it's because maybe maybe are realistic and realize those moves might not be enough to get them where they want to go, and I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
11th is Vegas. I think that's, I mean, if you're going to put Tampa 3rd and then Vegas 11th, I'm not sure how you differentiate those two front offices, but apparently voting has. They get destroyed for draft and develop, which is actually kind of hilarious because they've drafted well enough to trade those prospects into quality players, and they've also developed a few nice players that have kind of stuck around too.
So I think I will say this is an interesting thing because draft and development are tied together here, but drafting and developing are not the same. I would point out that they've made a handful of big trades, and so far they haven't really given up a prospect who's actually turned into something for the other team.
And maybe Suzuki.
Okay, yeah.
With Montreal for Pacioretty.
That's okay, that's fair. Suzuki. Beyond that, though, I guess I would just say that a lot of their roster is not expansion draft or homegrown. And then people that they did actually draft and they moved away, not really a ton of talent there. So maybe I don't think they should have been in the D's here that the public and the fan base gave them for draft and develop, but I probably would have been in the C's. Maybe like C or C+. If anything, trading, public had A+, fan base had B+, they should be an A+.
Yeah.
Again, so any drafting and developing issues you have of them in the actual NHL entry level draft, they have pretty much identified when a prospect isn't going to fit their team or isn't going to work out, and they've traded them for a valuable piece. So whether you want to call that trading or roster building or vision, I don't know. I feel like 11th is too low for Vegas.
Far too low.
Yeah.
I'll end where I started with Vegas. I don't see any difference between them and Tampa. Actually, I think I like Vegas.
I like
front
Vegas
office
more.
better. Yeah.
Yeah. Which going back to kind of who we had thrown up top there, I think you and I were kind of saying we ended up Florida, Dallas, and we would have put Colorado up there. Vegas and Colorado.
Yeah.
I don't know. I almost like Vegas more because ultimately they are a recent expansion team. So what they're doing is almost a little more impressive because of that. So but they should be a top 5 easily. 11th is a little crazy.
Speaking of teams that are probably to a team that's probably too high, Chicago Blackhawks. I understand we're optimistic about the prospects.
I'm honestly not.
But, the sentiment that they are.
Yeah.
But outside of Bedard, we don't know how good any of them really are. And I don't think they've built a poor, like they've made moves to make their roster better, and I don't think they've done anything super to jeopardize their long term. But they're not. It's not there yet. They should not be getting this much credit for making obvious draft picks, basically.
So this is kind of where I just have an issue. Like, how do I compare Colorado and Chicago to each other? So this offseason, I actually kind of liked Chicago going out and getting a handful of veterans because I think they were kind of in a spot where some of their prospects were getting too much playing time too quickly, which could actually negatively impact, call it their draft and develop characteristic, whatever we would want to call that. So I don't mind what they did, but I also again, I have trouble putting them in and comparing them to a Colorado or a Vegas or a Dallas. Like, I would maybe say, okay, how do they compare with Utah? That's a little more apples to apples. At this point, I probably don't put them above Utah, and we're dropping Utah. So I don't know. Chicago's
Montreal would be another
high.
one that would be in this category too.
Yes, yeah.
I actually think I prefer Montreal slightly but they're slightly in different spots too. So because Montreal's had to give those second contracts, Chicago hasn't yet.
That's the thing.
So
I guess we'll see how the rest of this list goes. I definitely don't move Chicago up. 12 might be a little high, but I'm not dropping them to the bottom of the list necessarily because they're kind of a team that needs to be in the spot that they're in right now. They shouldn't be pushing too far forward.
Ironically, so a team that probably falls right in the same with Chicago is San Jose, who comes in 13th. I agree that San Jose should be behind Chicago. I think both are a little bit too high. Both have made obvious picks, but we haven't seen much else beside them. I think San Jose, I have questions about where they're how you laid out for Chicago, bringing in some veterans to take some tough minutes out. I don't know if San Jose's done enough of that, or maybe they have enough holdovers to do that with.
Yeah.
The fact that San Jose has no retained salary spots left as a rebuilding team, I think is their biggest issue. And that's a knock on the current front office, too.
Add in Logan Couture.
Correct.
Is still on the roster.
And
you would think
Marc-Edouard Vlasic to a lesser extent, but
he might just be tough to move, but I would have thought with Couture you could retain, I think half would be $4 million. I think he's on an $8 million deal.
You would have takers for that.
So that's one I don't love, and I don't love that Carlson had retention in his deal. Like, it was a Norris Trophy. What are you doing?
Hurdle.
Hurdle, that was a weird one with retention. Just felt very forced at the time. Like you didn't have to make that trade right then.
Even Brent Burns to an extent too.
Yeah. So I don't know. I agree with you. They need to move down a little bit. They did add to Foley.
Yeah.
Which is good, I think, to kind of surround some of the young guys with talent. And also, let's bring in a top 6 winger so we can put these other young prospects in a suitable role. But yeah, I don't know if there's enough of the good veterans surrounding yet. So I don't put them above Chicago. They're in the similar range, similar category. Probably bumped down a little bit for sure.
14 Boston, I think that's right around proper. Didn't like the Lindholm contract at all. Didn't love the Allmark for Korpisalo trade, but not, I don't know, the farther removed from it, I don't have as strong of feelings about it. We'll see how Korpisalo does as a backup. I personally like Zadorov. They've done well keeping their contracts in line. They've done well to continue to stay as one of the top teams in the league. Like, I think there's knocks, but I think there's positives. To me, that's kind of a middle tier front office.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's also, it's tough with a team like Boston that kind of had I guess Pasta, Marchand, they're still there, but when you have Bergeron gone, Krejci gone, Chara gone, there was a little bit of a change in their core, really. So from a vision perspective, the fan base said C+. That might be a little critical because when you lose your 1C and 2C from retirement, like those aren't easy to replace. And I guess you can be a little critical of draft and develop because they have made some picks that ultimately haven't become much for them. But they were also trading some assets away as they were cup contenders for a decade with that core. So I don't know. I think they're kind of right where they should be. They're kind of doing what they should be. I also didn't love Lindholm. But at some point, if they think his style of play might fit, because in the past it was at times similar to a Bergeron, not as good, but could play a two-way role. Maybe he fits well with Marchand or Pasternak. I don't know. I don't love anything they do. I don't absolutely hate anything they've done. So, yeah, they're fine.
15 Washington, I like them a little bit better than 15. I'd put them ahead of a lot of the teams we've kind of been dropping down the rankings. I think they maybe go up to 10 to me. To me, the one place they maybe haven't done quite as well as drafting and developing. I know they've traded away assets, but we'll see. There's still some hope and promise, but it seems like some players that they drafted with their first round picks and were thought of a little bit higher have kind of plateaued, like a Connor McMichael, Hendrix LaPierre, are the two names that come into mind. Evan Miroshnichenko. He's a tough situation because of health and everything too. Yeah. So I'm not going to full on knock that yet, but just feels like some of the guys they've drafted and quote unquote developed have maybe not developed as much as they should. But I also loved this offseason maybe more than a lot of the average observer did because I like some of the swings they took. So maybe I'm a little bit higher on them than the average person, but I'm okay with saying that.
This offseason was very good, I think. Going back to the trade deadline, being able to move on from Kuznetsov, which ultimately Carolina now has too. But in the moment, it seemed like a contract that you're not going to be able to move, and they were able to move on. And ultimately trading him to a division rival was kind of funny. I thought, I agree this offseason was very good for them. It popped into my head So the Carolina, New Jersey area, a touch below them, probably.
I think so.
I don't think they're quite there with them, but this offseason was very impressive, I think. They did take a little bit of a gamble with Dubois. They moved out Kemper, who ultimately wasn't working in that specific trade. So in a way, okay, that's good. Dubois' contract is bigger, both AAV and length. So there's a gamble there, but they very obviously needed a top 6 center. Really a top line center, but for sure a top 6 center as well. So of any team that's probably in a spot where we know they're going to try to keep contending with Ovechkin and didn't have a whole lot in high-end talent coming, if any team's going to take a risk on a player like Dubois, it makes sense that Washington would. So, yeah, I think 15's a little too low. I think they would slot in kind of right behind kind of the Carolina and New Jersey.
They're right around Nashville for me.
Yeah, probably.
Both had big off seasons in different ways, but those two teams are similar. I think I actually put Washington a touch ahead, but that's like splitting hairs.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that 9-10-ish spot is probably where I'd have them. 16, Anaheim Ducks, I think they're too high. I'll just straight up say it. Like, I think the front office has made some good draft picks, done some good things, but I don't think that they've done a great job building out outside of making those picks. Like, Lucas Carlson looks like a very good idea.
Yeah.
They did well to capitalize on trading Jamie Drysdale for Carter Gauthier there.
I was going to say
they did well there.
Very good, probably.
But again, we're talking a lot of players that have played one season or haven't played in the NHL. I don't know. Last offseason, they went in on free agency. This offseason, they've basically done nothing. I don't know if maybe they're realizing that last offseason was a little bit of a mistake, but like I don't know.
I wouldn't even.
I still don't see the full vision from them yet.
I think last offseason might have been there. Okay, let's try and surround our young talent with some veterans. And right now the plan might just be, let's see what these young guys have. And you can't have an entire top 6, top 9 full of 19, 20-year-olds. So having someone like a Killorn and Ryan Strome, and then defensively you have Radko Gudas, like, it's good to have players like that. It is a little weird that it seems like they kind of pressed the gas pedal down last offseason, and then this offseason it's like, where are the Anaheim Ducks? So yeah, I don't know. 16 might be a little high, but I'm not as sour on them, I don't think. I almost like that they didn't necessarily keep pressing the gas down too much, because I think they could potentially get in trouble in free agency a little bit.
Zegras situation, I'd also knock them for too. That like they ironically have a pretty good grade for draft and develop, especially from their fans, and like Zegras has kind of plateaued as well. Again, the draft has been there. I haven't seen the development yet, so we'll see. I put them honestly probably below Chicago, maybe ahead of San Jose as far as like rebuilding teams.
I agree. I think they're right there with Chicago for me. Definitely above San Jose. The more I think about it, kind of, San Jose should maybe drop a little bit lower for some of the moves that they've made. But yeah, kind of right in that same group, I think.
Rangers, we just did a long episode on them that was released last week. You should go and listen to that for our thoughts here. So I think we keep the Rangers fairly short. They're at 17. I think that's about right. They've done some things well. They've done some things not as well. There's some things that there's room for improvement, but they've also stayed consistently pretty good. So To me, right around like them and the Bruins should be probably right around each other, which is kind of how this shakes out.
Yeah, it's interesting to me looking at this that the general public was kind of viewing this team as average, slightly above average, and the fan base seems to be pretty unhappy with the team. So I would say, yeah, go ahead, go listen to our Rangers episode if you haven't already. Some of the critiques that we had, I'm guessing the fan base is kind of right there with us.
I will say I'm more down on this front office this year than I was last year. So maybe they should drop a little bit, but I think 15 to 20 is probably where they are.
Yeah.
Calgary Flames had a good off season in that they didn't do anything drastic to try to stay as contenders. By a lot of accounts, people like their draft. I think right around here, I'd put them ahead of Anaheim, I think, but close.
I'd put them above some of the teams in that category, the Anaheim, Chicago, San Jose.
They might be the number one of those.
Yeah.
It would be, them in Chicago would be close to me.
Okay.
But I think that overall this is fine. Yeah, I mean, get Markstrom out. I don't know, like, they had a good draft. They didn't do anything dumb in free agency, which I think had to be their number one goal, is to not give out long term to anyone and get themselves in a future cap situation that they shouldn't do, basically.
Yep.
So, Flames. I think the fans are a little high. I think the public's a little low. Average the two out, and I think right in the middle is probably fair for them. Winnipeg Jets 19. I think this is probably about right. Maybe a little bit high. I think I'd put them behind the Bruins, behind the Rangers, if we're talking like that tier of teams. I think the big knock on them is development of their players and prospects, especially with the Rucker McGroarty situation.
There were a lot of
Cole Perfetti, I guess.
A lot of questions about Perfetti. I would even knock them. It seems like the fan base and the public did a little bit for free agency. Winnipeg, I don't think, is a city place team that players are overly drawn to go sign with. But it is tough when you trade for a guy like Monahan, when you trade for Toffoli, and then they both go out the door and you don't really replace them. I think that's what the public saw, the fan base saw. And I guess, sure, that's recency bias because you could take another step back in the future of them acquiring those two players. But I don't know. I don't love their offseason. It feels like for a few years now they've kind of been a stuck in the middle team. Even though they were very solid this last year, I don't know. I don't see where the next step of Stanley Cup is quite coming from.
They did well in the Dubois trade, and then to me, kind of, I don't think the Scheifele deal was bad, but I don't know if I would have done it, especially at that length and cost.
Yeah.
So, like, to me, and then Hellbuck was fine, but like last offseason, step forward, step back. This offseason feels like a step back.
Yeah.
I think they're about where they should be in the rankings, because I think there's worse front offices, but there are certainly better.
Yep.
Philadelphia Flyers at 20. I mean, this is where we talk about them probably relative to Chicago, Anaheim, Calgary, San Jose. I think they're in the middle of those teams, to be honest. Like, I think I think them and Anaheim are similar to me for different reasons, but they're drafting guys. They're hoping those younger players come. My big knock on Philadelphia is I still don't know what their longer-term plan vision is, giving Travis Konecny a long-term extension while also kind of simultaneously doing some selling, but not really doing some selling.
Yeah, you still got guys like a Scott Lawton.
Just a lot of wheel spinning.
Yeah.
So I think that this is probably fair for them.
They're kind of caught in the middle of wanting to be good, but they were kind of supposed to do a rebuild.
They don't want to be bad, but they don't have enough to be good. But they know that they need to rebuild, retool a little, and not fully committing that direction, I think, is a problem.
Yep.
Detroit at 21, I think, is too high. I don't see it.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on really in Detroit. Team that is not very good with underlying numbers. Ultimately not good enough to be a playoff team. I don't really see... they have some good prospects. They've had some good younger players come up. Obviously, Mo Sider, Lucas Raymond, that's good. But they've also just made some weird trades. Jake Wallman, that was an odd one this year. Some weird signings. Why are you signing Andrew Kopp and JT Confer? They're almost the same player. Confer might be a little better offensively, but in general, you sign two middle six, maybe ideally third line guys who play a very similar game. I don't know. It doesn't. Nothing that they've done is really putting them into the next tier of you're a playoff team. They're kind of a stuck in the middle type of team almost.
Outside of right now, Sider and Raymond, who has this front office drafted and developed that you would give them high marks for?
They've got some guys that haven't been in the NHL yet because they clog up the NHL with
Correct.
A bunch of veterans who aren't playing well.
And I think very fair so it's fair to point out that Detroit's had some bad lottery luck. That's fair. But with a lot of picks Yzerman's made, he also has taken high floor, low ceiling guys. For example, this is not a knock on the player. Marco Kasper a couple years ago projects as the exact same role as Kopp and Comfer.
Yeah.
Which is not a bad thing, but then as you said, he went out and signed guys to clog those up. I guess Simon Edvinsson would be the other one that's close, but there's no spot for him. So I don't see the vision. I don't see the draft and develop either, because the only two that have proved it at the NHL level, Mo Sider, which was a pick that people knocked Yzerman for at the time, but has turned out very well, and Lucas Raymond, who was pretty much penciled in right in that, that was almost a chalk pick.
It was an easy pick to make, yeah.
So I don't know. Detroit, frankly, is bottom 5 front office for me.
Yeah.
Speaking of other teams that I still don't think are very good, are the Ottawa Senators, at least their front office. I don't think they had a good offseason. I mean, maybe it's not all they're doing. Maybe they were backed into a little bit of corners, but I guess they did well to get Allmark in. That's about it.
Yeah, I would say what I'm concerned with Ottawa is a lot of the younger players that they drafted and developed and were supposed to be the guys that kind of brought them to the playoffs and to being a top team. They're all in the NHL and have been there for a little while, and it hasn't happened. So it almost feels like they're kind of stuck there, like this is not how this was supposed to go. What do we do? Which, sure, they bring in Ullmark. They needed a goaltender. That's been an issue for them. So maybe that helps. I don't know. I think Ullmark is a real good goalie. I don't know if they're going to get the same ultimate statistics from him that Boston did. Boston, I think, was in general just a better team playing in front of him. So I don't know. I'm concerned that just ultimately what they've built, even though there's some good names and on paper you can build out a solid lineup, I'm kind of wondering if it just isn't fitting for some reason. I don't know the exact reason, but are they kind of just spinning their wheels a little bit? Yeah, until we really start to see success from this group, I almost lean towards the group might need a shakeup, which is an issue in itself.
I found one funny thing I want to point out before we move on. Fan base is 86% more confident in the current front office. I don't see how you get there. That I guess they've shown to be a little bit better, but I don't know how you I think at best you can say they're this I have the same confidence. I don't.
Some of that might be the old front office is gone.
Yeah.
So we have a new front office. Good. I honestly think some of that.
I think that's a big portion of it.
Yeah.
But St. Louis at 23, I'd put above Detroit and Ottawa for sure. I'm not saying that they're fantastic.
Number one because they did an offer sheet.
I guess they are number one now. These rankings were compiled before the offer sheet.
Yep.
So
no, they could be a little higher, maybe.
They're in the probably slightly below Boston and the Rangers for me, but they're in that discussion.
Yeah.
But they've done a better job than Detroit has. Like, they have playoff success to show for it and are potentially a better better roster as well as Detroit. Better than Ottawa. I'm not saying they've been fantastic. There's some bad contracts on the books there, but they're also not. I don't know. They also transitioned okay from some of their older players to younger. Again, I'm not saying fantastic, but
no, they're not top 10. But
I think this is a little harsh.
Yeah, a little bit. They could
bottom 10
should be able to sneak into the top 20, I would think.
Correct. Yeah, they're not bottom 10. They're probably 15 to 20.
Yep.
Next, I'd say I'd put them a little bit higher, but not much. Minnesota Wild. Again, I put them ahead of Detroit and Ottawa. Not sure how much higher than that.
Similar to St. Louis for me, honestly.
I think I put them a little behind St. Louis right now. We've talked about in past episodes how they continue to seem to sign the same type of players.
Yes.
And still not address some glaring needs. I know.
True.
They made the decision to buy out Parise and Suter, which was within their right and maybe was a good decision. Like, it might be a good decision, but they're still paying the consequences for that. So I think they're behind St. Louis. So they're probably right around 20th for me.
They're close to St. Louis for me because they do have some younger talent that they've been able to ultimately draft and develop. You look at a Kaprizov, Boldy, Brock Faber now. There are a lot of issues with them. I've been critical over the years with them as far as just being, again, one of those teams stuck in the middle. I feel like they've been like that for a while now. I would say they're kind of right in there with the Blues. Another situation I could probably flip them back and forth and have trouble deciding.
25, I think it's partly the Edmonton Oilers are here mostly because of who they hired to be their general manager. I think outside of that, they've actually had a very good offseason. I think you could also knock them a little bit going back to Ken Holland. He wasn't fantastic. I think the short Jeff Jackson era, his kind of de facto GM was good.
Yes.
And now they have Stan Bowman, who should not be a GM in the NHL.
Yep.
I understand he's tried to make amends and do some work, but he just walked right back into a job when a good situation arose for him. That's just shouldn't happen.
No. Plenty of candidates.
So as far as what they've
candidates.
done, I'd put them as a middle of the road team. They have the best player in the world and haven't won a cup. They came close. They did some good things and they've done some bad things. They're in to me, they're ahead of Boston and they're ahead of the Rangers, but that's right around where they belong.
Yeah, kind of right in the middle there. I agree. 25 is way too low. They should be 15-ish.
But they're down here because they hired Stan Bowman.
Yes.
So they do get some
True.
deserved knocks.
Yeah. Vision, maybe. Yeah, that could tie into Vision.
Yeah. 26, Buffalo Sabres. It's tough. As pessimistic as I think fans can be, I'd still take what they've done over Detroit and Ottawa's front office.
They honestly, like, to me, they should be above the Chicago. Like, they should probably be middle ground.
15 to 20-ish.
Yeah. A knock for the Sabres is just you've missed the playoffs again.
Yep.
And again and again and again. So the more you keep doing that, especially when there were actual expectations, there weren't expectations for years. I'm not shocked that they're this low. I don't think they really should be this low, but comes with the territory when you're 13 years.
I think it's something like that.
Yeah.
I'm a Bills fan, so until we get to 17, it's not a big deal. The one thing I'll point out about the kind of Sabres ranking, last year they were ranked 8th.
Yeah.
Coming off a very good season, there was a lot of promise. I think they have had a better offseason this year than they did last offseason when they should have made moves. So falling this far and being knocked as far as confidence in the front office goes this year compared to last year, it's because the results weren't bad. Were bad, but realistically, the front office was probably better this year than last offseason.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just because no one knew the results of last offseason, essentially. Yeah.
Okay, so Utah, Montreal, Buffalo. Rank those 3.
I would probably say Utah, Buffalo, Montreal.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. With them all sort of being different situations, but in a way very similar. Yeah. Utah, Buffalo, Montreal.
27, and I think rightfully, maybe even too high on this list, Seattle Kraken. Where do we stop the Detroit and Ottawa free fall? I'm not sure we do. To me, this Seattle, Detroit, Ottawa belong together in some order.
Yeah. Seattle, just even going back to the expansion draft, a lot of questions about that, and coming full circle, I guess, or just all the way to the now. They've kind of had the same issues, the same holes on their roster, and they've yet to fix them. One of our biggest critiques throughout their existence has been they have a lot of the same player, and they're missing elite players, and that's the case after this offseason too. Added similar players. I don't know. They missed the playoffs. I kind of see them. I guess they could sneak into the wild card, but I could just as easily see them miss the playoffs again. I don't love what they've done.
My knock on the front office is they seemingly have a smart analytics staff. I've met a couple of the people. I've got a good impression of some of the I don't think Ron Francis listens enough to him. But
based on the moves they've made, I would think you're right.
It's either that or the people are not as qualified as I believe they are. And given Carolina also wasn't great at times with Ron Francis' tenure, I start to point to him as the problem.
Yeah.
28 Columbus Blue Jackets.
I think 28 might be a little low, but
I guess, do they belong above? We have Seattle, Detroit, Ottawa. Do they belong above those teams, or are they?
I probably put them maybe with those teams, maybe at the top of those teams. I think they've drafted well recently. That's also a new front office.
Yeah, Don Waddell and Jarmo Kekalainen.
So this is hard to. Yeah, so I would say maybe like at the top of that list with like Ottawa, Seattle,
Detroit.
and Detroit.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to go too crazy about Columbus because I don't want to blame this current front office for prior decisions, but I would just Monahan seems like they're still kind of stuck in that what are we, where are we in our plan, which I was hoping there would be kind of a reset there with the new front office. I don't think that's the case.
Yeah. 29 Pittsburgh Penguins. I think that this is probably a fair criticism. I might put them ahead of Detroit and Ottawa, but actually no, I don't think so, because I think there's expectations that have been met and they haven't been met, and that you have Sidney Crosby, you have Evgeny Malkin, Chris Letang, you bring in Erik Karlsson, and you're still not good enough. No, this is rightfully, like, being bottom 5 is rightfully deserved.
So I struggle a little with Pittsburgh because there's part of me that says, yeah, they haven't really done enough if the plan is the core, or to keep contending with the core. But they also added Erik Karlsson after a Norris Trophy season, and I think it would be fair to play devil's advocate. How much more can you do beyond adding a Norris Trophy defenseman? Ultimately, like, it didn't work this past year for them.
And I think that's all fair, but then this offseason they really haven't done much to.
That's fair.
So it's kind of been Erik Karlsson and nothing in 2 years with who they have.
Yeah.
I guess Gensel for Bunting is the other move up of some level of substance, but
which I think could actually, it could potentially pay off. Bunting looked good with Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
And it seemed like just at some point they weren't going to re-sign Gensel.
Yeah. No.
So, like, that trade was fine. They didn't really get any high-end assets, which I think is fair to criticize them for a little bit. I don't know if I would necessarily have them this low. I might put them up towards, like, not within Boston, but behind them, kind of maybe more with the Blues, like that area. I think there's a lot of issues with Pittsburgh that aren't Dubas's fault, that were kind of there already.
Yeah. I still just, the lack of moves, especially this offseason for me.
Yeah,
is just, that's the problem.
Fair.
You saw it wasn't good enough. You know who you still have.
Yeah.
I think he deserves criticism at this point for this, and
yeah. I do. So I do too. I'm not going to knock him all the way down the list for that, because he also did acquire Erik Karlsson.
30th Toronto Maple Leafs. I know fans want to see more than first rounds of the playoffs, but I think that this is being a little overly critical of Toronto.
Yep.
They had in my opinion, Treleving has had 2 fine off seasons. I'm not going to say it's been fantastic, but he's done pretty well with what he inherited, and like, I think this off season was pretty decent. He's just like you talked about Pittsburgh. To me, I definitely put Toronto above Pittsburgh. And I think he's right in with Boston. Like, to me, Toronto, Boston, Rangers, I could debate those three, but to me, those three are very close to each other right now.
Yeah, I think, I don't know, this is fans being tired of the first round pretty much, and really the public probably just disliking the Maple Leafs. I'm more curious to see what happens after this season with like the Marner situation pretty much, because that's a very big issue. Not exactly the same, but similar to when Tree Living was in Calgary and he had to figure out what to do with Tkachuk, because I mean Tkachuk was an RFA, a little bit different, but just a very big change for an organization to have a franchise player leaving. I'm fine with what he's done so far. I think there's potential for either big praise or big criticism next offseason. Right now, I agree they should be middle of the pack.
We got two more teams. I think that these two are probably rightfully almost in their spots. The Kings are 31st and the Islanders are 32nd. The Islanders, Lou has done almost nothing for 3 years now outside of keep his same not successful enough core together. And I think that it's time to do something. So I think them being last at this point is fair. He hasn't drafted overly well. He hasn't given any egregious contracts, but he hasn't given any great contracts either. And just an attachment to keeping the status quo on teams that just haven't been good enough. Yeah. Moving on from Trotz for Lambert was a disaster, and then correcting to Patrick Roy might work out, but like there's been very few positives to point to in the last couple of years with Lou's tenure with the Islanders. So I think 30 seconds fair.
Yeah.
The Kings, 31st.
Yeah, I mean, Dubois trade did not work out for them, obviously. Just disappointment is probably the best word for them. I think we heavily criticized them for the Byfield contract, which I believe bought one
correct
UFA year, of just kind of why. Almost worse than doing a short term. Goalie situation, we had kind of identified in past couple of years, really needing to find a top goalie. And their goalie move this year ended up being when they were trying to get rid of Dubois, they get a goalie who was ultimately being shopped by his own team for not working out there. Darcy Kemper. Maybe it works for the Kings. I don't know if it will. I don't know. I don't love what they've done. I feel like they were working towards almost getting to a new core, kind of Kopitar passing the torch a little bit, and they've kind of stalled a little bit.
They at one point had one of the most promising prospect pools, traded some of those players away for Dubois, still haven't played some of them, like
Arthur Kaliev, what's going on there?
Yep. He was good, but didn't like
Yeah.
I think the Kings being pretty low, they had the potential to be one of the best teams in hockey just a couple of years ago, and now there's almost more questions than answers. And in all this, they've gotten themselves into a rough cap situation, which just is absolutely mind-boggling with the amount of young talent they had at one point.
Yeah.
To now have questions about depth and cap space is just it's been a pretty spectacular fumble. So they're probably rightly there. So
yeah, I would say so. I think of all the teams in the past year to 2 years, probably one of the more disappointing teams for sure.
So that's all 32 teams. We appreciate you listening. This episode of the Max Stern Podcast, available on pretty much every single major podcast platform. Follow our content on X at AFP Analytics. Any thoughts? Feel free to hit us up there. You probably already commented on this article anyways, but these are, I guess, our extended thoughts on these front offices and everything. So we appreciate you listening, and we'll talk to you next time.